terms of that level of leadership? You know, are you at a level 1 at the moment in terms of the relativeness and where you are and what it is you do, or you're up there in the level 4, level 5 leadership? And really, it's just something to reflect on in relation to that specifically. So who am I, and what gives me the right to actually be with you this afternoon, sharing with you, I guess, my thoughts, my ideas with regards to leadership. I'm a high performance business coach. I've been doing this now. I've been coaching for probably around about 17 years. Today, I am focused predominantly on unlocking high performance in people. That's an area of drive and commitment for me. And prior to that, 7 years ago, I was in the military. So I'm a veteran, and I did 28 years service in the infantry, in the army. Went up through the ranks to regimental sergeant major, and then was commissioned as a captain and finished off my time in the military as a captain. Was a master coach in the military, so I know a thing or two about leadership. I was a leadership mentor and did a bit of executive coaching as well. And that's really what gives me, I guess, the confidence today to stand up in front of you and be sharing some thoughts with you. So make sure you've got a notebook at hand that you're able to obviously relate to what we're going to be talking about this afternoon. Take away the bits that are going to be useful for you, and hopefully go out there and lead in a better way. That's the aim for this afternoon. So the overview of what to expect this afternoon. There may be areas where you've got to lead differently. Leading remotely is going to require, I guess, more influence than necessarily command, because of the nature of the distance that you're going to be from your people. I'm going to talk you through the 3 O's model, and that will make more sense in a short while. I'm going to introduce a little bit about remote leadership model, and looking at technology as a tool and not a hindrance. Again, today's a great example where we're using technology in that respect. And also at the end, we'll have a bit of a foray into servant leadership and some of what that might mean in terms of your focus going forward and how you deliver as a leader. So if that's okay, let's dive straight in. We've got 60 minutes. It's going to be relatively fast and furious in that respect. So first of all, leadership and location second. Let's just think about that. The fundamentals and foremost is about leadership. The location and the fact that we are, respecting social distancing, that we are, working from a distance, shouldn't really make a difference to us. It should be, the second factor in this, and leadership comes first. The principles of leadership don't change. Just because we're working from a distance doesn't mean that the principles of leadership have to change in any way, shape, or form. But here's a thought for you. The common questions that you're going to ask yourself through leadership are these 4 questions that I'm presenting to you at the moment are 4 questions that are likely to be ones that you're going to come across and you're going to reflect on. Do we know that our people are doing the work that they need to be doing? Are we getting enough social interaction? And I think in many respects, even if you think about those points now and ask yourself the question, did they relate to you as a leader as much as they do to your team? Are we getting enough good feedback when we consider opinions? And we'll touch on that in a little bit more detail just in a short while. And can we be effective when we're not, co-located? And these are some of the reflections, and it may be why we've got so many of you joining me today in terms of actually that stuff's quite interesting and quite important, Steve. So, there's some of the areas that we do need to focus on. So the second point here, the second rule that we're going to dive into, and we're going to base this afternoon, incidentally, on a series of, I guess, remote leading rules, is leading remotely requires you to lead differently. Now, remember what I said, the principles remain the same, but there is notion in terms of how you lead. Now, even before, COVID-19 struck and we found ourselves in this challenging time, One of the interesting factors here is 80% of white collar managers have at least one direct report currently who was working at distance. Now all of a sudden you've got everybody working at distance, and we find ourselves in a much different situation and scenario in that respect. So what is it that we need to focus on in that? And there are, I guess, two significant repercussions that require you to focus as a leader. The methods of communications that enabled your most success in the past have shifted, they've changed. You've got to use technology, as we'll go on to discover. In terms of the necessarily the human interaction has changed and shifted, and that's a communication point. And the isolation side of life isn't just so much about the emotion of being a leader. The isolation now is the fact that you are isolated as a leader. You don't have the same interaction. You don't have the same responses, body language, expressions that when you are engaged with somebody in leadership, that's what happens. So it's kind of interesting when we look at it in that respect. The act of leadership itself hasn't changed, really, in terms of what the outcomes and what you're looking for. But we need to do the same things, but in a different way and with a different set of tools. And today, as I've mentioned, is a prime example of some of those tools that we're utilizing to actually, gain that level of response. So it's worthwhile just reflecting on those points as we go through. And again, as you're, taking down your notes, these are going to be the areas that you might want to reflect on afterwards in terms of what some of this looks like. So rule number 3, working remotely changes the interpersonal dynamic. And I just mentioned the fact that, leadership can be seen to suffer from this remoteness, from social distancing, from the fact that you've got your team working from their homes. So what have you got to do to actually, counter that? We're losing much of the interpersonal skills. We lose that face-to-face and non-verbal feedback. And in many respects, I don't know about you, but I certainly know that when I see my kids, although they're young adults now, when they communicate via text, it's the different context. Whereas sometimes I think I maybe get that wrong when somebody writes me a text, and I've been told off in the past that using capital letters in an email is actually shouting at someone. I've sent emails in the past that have been clearly shouting from start to finish. So that interpersonal communication is kind of shifted now. So what have we got to do to actually counter that? So you've got to ensure that your message is easily understood. Now, if that's written, if it's the way in which you actually convey that through email, through telephone conversation, think of your behaviors. If you are somebody who is a very dominant character, the likelihood is that you're not somebody to mince your words. Whereas when you were talking to somebody on a one-to-one basis, you got the response immediately and you were able to leverage that tone. Whereas interestingly now, in this context, that might be slightly different. It may be completely different in terms of what that looks like in terms of the responses you get. So you've got to start to take into account some of those behaviors. So how are you going to get those critical cues from your people? How are you going to know that something that you said has been responded in a positive or a negative fashion? Whereas you would normally have that as an interpersonal dynamic. Today, in these circumstances, you lose that. So you've got to start thinking a little bit outside of the box in terms of how you're going to actually, manifest those levels or that level of engagement. So let's have a look at that then in terms of rule number 4 and the use of technology. I think a lot of people at the moment would reflect in the fact that, actually the likes of Zoom, GoToWebinar, Teams, Skype, FaceTime, WhatsApp are now actually in the forefront of our mind in terms of that ability to actually utilize tools to engage with our people, and that they are no longer a barrier. When we look at this, there's effectively what we would term as the remote leadership side of life, having 3 working gears that interop, interweave within themselves. The gears interlock. That's the word I was looking for. So leadership management remains the fundamental, in terms of leading the behavior. So you as a leader and your standard behaviors remain the same. The technology side of life is the way in which, through leading remotely, you're able to then, create that level of balance. You're able to engage in that respect. So this is probably likely to be utilizing video, utilizing mobile technology, utilizing tablets, so that you can maybe start to increase and bring along that into personal connectivity. And the other side of this is actually the skills. Thankfully, I've been using some of this stuff for a little while. Interestingly, going live on Facebook is kind of new. And interestingly, Facebook have launched a new package on going live specifically to help in that respect. So when you look at it in that respect, it's kind of, what do we need to learn? And what do your people need to learn in order to actually be able to utilize it in the same context? So, for instance, today, we can ask for that level of interaction by asking you to actively put your hands up on the Zoom, on GoToWebinar, to show a level of interaction. So I've got to ask interesting questions, or I've got to ask specific questions that you're engaged in that respect. In the same context, understanding that there are question boxes that you can utilize, and how do I make sure that everybody in my team understands where those question boxes are and how they can start to engage. So in these type of scenarios, you can actually start to pick up that level of engagement from your team. Rule number 5 is about the 3 O's. And I just want to spend a little bit of time just going through these. Leadership is about actually, getting a direction and a focus in terms of where it is and what it is you want to achieve. So in the first instance, the outcome of your ability to lead, from a distance doesn't change. You've still got to lead your people in the same context as you have. As we said, the principles of leadership remain the same. So the outcomes need to remain the same. Just because we're working at a distance doesn't mean that our outcomes shouldn't be any different. And interesting, as I think, as we mentioned at the beginning, leadership management, that you can use this remote context in the same way. So isolation, lack of environmental cues, that repetition, with regards to the message being received in the same context, they often equal the barriers. So we've got to make sure that, as we've already mentioned in rules 1 to 4, that we're working around those now. The other point here then is that actually you've got to lead with and through other people. Now, again, that's a principle of leadership, whichever way you want to look at it. But actually, in this context, how do you engage with individuals that the teams are able to engage in a similar context, that the message is getting through to multiple people? That you're able to actually have a conversation and through the team still be able to facilitate the leadership that you want to impart. The team members need to be equally as engaged in this context as they are in your standard context. And then there's your assumptions, your beliefs and your assumptions. Where you are as a leader, leadership, can be a very lonely place, without the added advantage or disadvantage, I should say, of COVID-19 and how we work through social distancing. So when we start to look at this in terms of your beliefs and assumptions, this distancing, this social distancing, the fact that you've got to use this technology, the fact that you don't and aren't in the same office or the environment as your team, can have an impact on you. So you've got to make sure that you're focusing as much on yourself and your head in terms of your mindset, and not allowing the negative talk to drift in and actually, derail what it is that you're trying to achieve. So the 3 O's, outcomes remain the same. Others, you've got to lead with and through the others in your team. So engaging with that. Actually, there's a great story out there by a guy called David Marquette, and he's come up with a context called leader-leader. And right now, that leader-leader piece in terms of leading through others is absolutely imperative. One of the key focuses for me, and it was, the same during my military, experience, my time as a soldier and an officer, is the one role of leadership, if you want to break it down to one role, is to create new leaders. So in the remote 3Os model, where we look at others, that's one of the areas where you are nurturing that level of leadership. And then just make sure that you are as equally focused on your own mental health, your own mental position, your mindset as a leader, because that's going to be critical in terms of actually how you go forward. So let's take a look at question 6. One of the key factors here is the fact that as an organization, you need to have a set of clear goals set out, or a clear goal. I've done now, I think, in the region since COVID-19 lockdown started, of around about 130 guided plans with business owners. Again, through the medium of Zoom, a 3-hour session where we help business owners and guide them through actually putting a plan of action together to get themselves, their team, and the business through this, and in many respects, thrive. And our very first focus on that is positive communication. And that positive communication is about, letting people know what are the goals. What is it that we are aiming to achieve? What are our organizational outcomes that we are absolutely, committed to achieving through this period of time? And let's be clear, as a leader in whatever your organization, one thing is that we're not going to stand still. You absolutely can't just stop and stick your head into the sand and hope that, actually we'll go furlough and we'll come out and, we'll go back to normal daily jogging. That's not the way it's going to happen. If you stand still, the likelihood is that you're not going to be standing when this is all finished. So you've got to have a real focus on this. The other side then is your team, giving the team a real focus in terms of what success looks like for them. And this common goal, having a real focus in terms of where it is you need to get to is really, really critical. So what goals do you need to give your team? One of the things that we've got quite a few of our clients focused on at the moment is the idea that when they're, having and structuring their communication, that each and every day their team are challenged to identify their goals for that day. That each and every day, that they're identifying how are they progressing with the goal that the team is working on in the week. When you look at all of the different ways in which you can engage your team and make sure that you've got these goals set, you create momentum. You create a level of forward momentum to actually make sure that we're working in unison, working in the right direction. But each and every single person in your organization has a responsibility and working on those goals. Let's have a look at rule number 7. So rule number 7 really, many of you will probably be familiar with this one, that it's not just about achieving the goals, and whatever way you want to look at it, at the level that you want to look at it, is making sure that you were, many people. In fact, just give me a quick show of hands that everyone is, or if you're not, who's not familiar with the principle of SMART goal setting. So interesting. There's only a few hands going up in that respect. Only a few hands going up. So when we look at it in that respect, SMART goal setting is just making sure that, right from that personal goal to the team goal through to the organizational goal, we can see specifically what needs to happen. What's the outline of how the goal is going to be achieved. I guess I like the results orientated. But the other side of this, when I talk about SMART goals, I always talk about it's repeatable. Because if you're able to create a goal that is then repeatable, it means that you can repeat it but scale it up. And the other side is it's time bound. Whether that's a goal that you've got to achieve in the day, whether it's a team goal that the team are working on for that week, or whether it's an organizational goal that we're working on for that month or that 90 days. And we can measure and see exactly how we're getting on. It's going to be pretty critical in terms of the way in which we go about, aspiring to achieve these goals. It also relates to, I guess, the ability to set these goals out in smaller chunks as well. And that's why I say about, setting a daily goal. one of the things to think about here is, do you have right now with your team a daily huddle? Each and every day, do you come together and have a conversation with regards to what is happening, who's doing what, where they are? Here, write this down, Lion. One of the things that we do again with our clients is once a week, we do a Lion meeting. And a Lion meeting is simply last week, issues, opportunities, next week. So if once a week we can actually turn around and then say to ourselves, okay, so last week I did X, Y, and Z. I had a couple of issues I could use some help with, and these opportunities availed themselves. This is a good thing for me, and I'd like to share it with the team. And next week, my commitment is X, Y, and Z. All of these are ways in which you can actually really focus on achieving the goals, and then not just setting the goals. And it goes back to, as I mentioned, the positive communication. So number 8. And obviously this is one that I'm very, very clear with myself, is coach your team regardless where they work. Coaching, interestingly, and just this question, coaching is an area that most leaders feel they can improve. For those of you that are on the Zoom call with me, just pop your hand up and say, actually coaching is an area that I could improve. It's an area that I could focus on. Just put your hand up and let me know. Fabulous. Okay, so we're actually interested in, we're seeing quite a lot of hands going up, and that's interesting because it suggests it's an area that we could focus on. And coaching, without going into it, and I very easily could because I am a coach, is about listening but asking great questions. And if you imagine in the remote context as a leader, it's listening more than you actually, you talk. So asking those questions and then listening, and where maybe is the opportunity rises is digging a little bit deep into it, uncovering where the opportunities lie. I think the other side of this one as well is coaching. I think leaders might find it difficult because it may seem complicated and stressful when you're not seeing somebody. But I take it from me, that I've been doing this now for some time. The coaching offers an incredible opportunity, especially actually if you think about picking up a telephone and the only thing you've got is your ear and your voice. You have to listen. Now, most of us listen just to contribute to a conversation. And what I'm saying here on this bit with the coaching side of life is listen to understand first, and then have the conversation, then ask some great questions. Because it's when you ask those great questions, actually through this whole process, you've got the ability to open up incredible opportunity with your people. That I think that really just sums up what I just said. It is a two-way conversation. So when you're having that conversation, don't seek to do all the talking, which is sometimes it's quite interesting when you're sitting here talking to cameras. So asking great questions, listening. I think if you start to do that, and here's an idea for you. If you've got a remote team, and I dare say you have because you've jumped onto this call today or you listened to me on Facebook Live. The question here is then just pick up the phone, maybe once or twice a day, for no other reason to have a conversation, but to see if the conversation unfolds and avails an opportunity for you to be able to coach your team member through a particular challenge they may have, through to a higher level of ability and skill. Those type of things can have a massive impact with regards to your going forward and leading through this remote period, this crisis period in COVID-19. The final piece on this one is always to follow up. So if you have that conversation and there is some form of follow-up that is required, and it just gives confidence to the other party that actually you've listened, you've understood, you've taken on board, and there you go. That's my thoughts, my follow-up on it. So, rule 9: communicate in ways that work best for others rather than yourself. Just before I dive into this one, I'd like you to write down a reference with regards to, here we talk about the golden rule. But actually, I want to take this a level above for you, really, because the golden rule is about, how do we talk to people in a way that we want to be talking to, and often that's good, but there is a fundamental flaw to it. And what I want you to remember when you think about this now and think about your leadership is, how do I treat my people, each of them, how they want and need to be treated? And that means you've got to start to get a little bit of an insight as to their, I guess, their behaviors, the type of person they are. And can I communicate? Can I modify my communication to communicate in a language they understand? Go back to saying, one of the easiest behaviorals that we can see and comment on is that the dominant character doesn't want to mince their words, likes to be heard. You'll always hear them in a networking event or a party because they'll be the loudest there. But actually, if you're a leader of that nature, that's not the way that maybe someone who is relationship orientated wants to be communicated to, needs to understand and talk to. So you've got to start to think about, how do I modify my leadership? One of the things that we focus on is, and for those of you that have heard of it, it's called DISC, and it's a behavioral profile, and it's based on dominant, influence, stable, and conscientious people. So that's your dominant, loud person, your influential people person, your steady person who is relationship oriented, and your conscientious person who is, really dug into the detail. Now, as a leader, the phrase that I always use with people that I'm talking and guiding through leadership is, you need to be more DISC. You don't need to be your natural behavior, or you need to be more DISC. You need to be able to lead people in the way that it works best for them. And DISC is something that actually really helps the communication. So if you've got, many of my clients we do DISC profiling with, but if you've got a team right now that you haven't done a DISC profile with, then actually what better way to start to determine how do we communicate? How do we do a DISC profile with the team in order to get the best out of each of them? How do we know how to communicate? And interestingly, how does the team know how to communicate with each other a basis of their DISC profile? So right now, in a remote situation, DISC profiling can be incredibly helpful, because of just the way that we can help people to adapt their communication to work and communicate more effectively. So let's have a look at rule number 10. So rule number 10 is really how do you get to this point where you're able to get a better understanding of what people are thinking, and not just what they're doing. It's a bit of a challenge here, and the reality on this one is how do you be seen? How do you gather that information that you need to understand in terms of what's going on in the organization? Yeah, we did a session today with one of my clients, and it was a day where the entire team was on, and we shared the vision. And in terms of going through that, there were ways and means that, as we were engaging the audience to ensure that the message was being received, that there was engagement all the way through. And then the other side of this one is how do you get yourself seen? How do you get yourself seen in a way that your team can engage with? This is, again, goes back to some of the tools and some of the platforms, some of the ways in which you actually now need to start to communicate. Office 365, shared documents. There are multiple different platforms out there. Business management systems and customer relationship systems right now are going to be instrumental in terms of how your teams are interoperability and their ability to work together. And it's almost when we're seeking this, it's being aware of the impression that you've made. Now, I always remember when I was the regimental sergeant major, and I used to walk around the camp, and I don't know, for those of you that can picture the scene, I'm 6'3". I was a fairly stocky guy in the military. I'm stocky in a different area now, namely my one ab. But when I was in the military and I used to walk around the camp, if I wasn't wearing a smile, I could see soldiers, 100 meters away, scurrying, off my path, off the route that I was going to take, and hiding, because they just would assume that as the leader, as the RSM, I was going to be grumpy with them. So the tonality, the way you talk, the way you engage, what you say, when you're able to have that interpersonal, video conferencing, what your face is telling people. Interestingly, on video conferencing, your attentiveness, because you sit looking at a screen, and most people have 2 or 3 screens nowadays. And if you're having a conversation or a meeting and suddenly you're looking somewhere else as the leader, that is going to resonate, that you're not listening, that you're not engaged. Looking into the camera lens when you want to add emphasis to a particular point, because we would look at a screen and you're looking at, away from the camera. So some of these are some of the key factors and points that you need to start to think about. And leading on from that is, are you visible? And how visible are you? And with regards to that, with that visibility, what is the perception of your team? What do they see? Because it's that level of perception that's going to have an impact one way or the other. And I think actually making sure that you are, seen in the appropriate light is going to be pretty key. So when you start to think about these aspects and these challenges, it starts to change the landscape of what you need to be doing as a leader, and indeed, as we mentioned earlier, as a manager. There's an interesting one for you when we dive into Rule 11. And Rule 11 is, again, it's a fundamental aspect in any organization. And I think, I suspect many of you would agree, an organization without trust is going to struggle. So trust at a distance, in this context, doesn't happen by accident. Go back to some of those 4 questions I asked in Rule 1. The primary question is that, are my team doing what they should be doing? Are they, efficient in what they should be doing? Are they working as hard and as diligently as they are now? Now, if you've got a team that there was strong trust before all of this, the likelihood is they absolutely are. So it's harder to actually build the trust in this environment, but it's equally easier to lose and break it. So you've got to really take some forethought and determine, how are we going to build trust? And actually, when I say we, as a leader, how are you going to build and nurture trust in your organization? How are you going to maintain it? I think one of the things to remember on this one is sometimes trust isn't just a soft skill. Sometimes trust is about having to say what needs to be said when it needs to be said. I had a phrase that came from one of my old commanding officers, which was always stuck with me. And it was this, do what you ought, not what you want. How does that message get across to your team? That in everything they're doing what they ought to be doing, not what they want to be doing. Today, fantastic day, beautiful, 18 degrees. I think most of us would probably agree that this afternoon I'd prefer to be sat out in the garden or going out and doing my fitness. And actually what we're asking is actually for our team to make sure that they are, doing what we're asking them to do. So in order for high levels of trust to exist, as we mentioned, the common goal. So you've got to make sure you've got that common purpose. So this almost in some respects leads back to that why. Why is it we're doing what we're doing? Jot down Simon Sinek and look for the golden circles, or start with why. Simon Sinek is a great orator out there. He's done a TED Talk. It's one of the most listened to TED Talks and watched TED Talks out there. And he talks about starting with why. And the question I would ask you when you look at the common purpose is that I would suspect that most of your team know what they do. A vast majority of the team probably know how to do it. But in terms of this question, the common purpose, how many of your team know why they're doing it? And if they don't know why they're doing it, have you actually clarified in your own mind what the purpose is of your business or your organization? And if not, you might need to go back and just make sure that that's really, really clear. Because if we get a unifying purpose with our team right now, that can have an incredible impact in terms of, the level of productivity, the level of which, people are actually engaging. The next piece on is obviously the competence. And are your people competent in terms of what it is they're doing? I talked about leader. Are some of your people competent at their levels to lead and manage? And an interesting point here, and this is an area where I think some businesses will be getting it wrong right now, is when I use the phrase micromanaging. A lot of people will think, well, actually, the only way to get through this is to micromanage our people. And it actually isn't. You know, micromanaging your people right now is probably one of the worst things you could do. Micromanaging your people and understanding how to micromanage is probably one of the best things you can do. Let me explain. To micromanage your people, it's about understanding what that means. So to micromanage someone is giving them clear direction, guidance, maybe giving them the training and the direction on a one-to-one basis to build their competence. And as you build their competence, you build their confidence. And as you build their confidence, you get to a point where micromanagement isn't required anymore. And they can get on and do what it is they need to do because they have the competence and the confidence to know that that's their contribution. Most people get micromanagement completely wrong and think it's just a case of putting the thumb screws on somebody and you know, working them to you know, a very dictatorial process. And these are some of the nuances that we've got to understand. And then what motivates? What motivates our people to go that extra mile? And right now, you know, I said, you know, what motivates your people this afternoon to go the extra mile when actually I wouldn't mind being sat outside with a pina colada? You know, this is where these three elements will help in this remote circumstance during this crisis situation to get the best out of your people. Ultimately on this one, the greater the level of alignment throughout these three areas, and essentially the alignment of your team, the stronger the trust is going to be. Now, this might be something that you've got to do in terms of bringing your team together to have a centralized meeting in order to actually give them the advice and guidance in terms of where they are and what it is they need to achieve. Having that level of clarity and that level of focus going forward, you know, aligning your team now, getting that alignment in place. And I said, you know, we just, with one of my clients did a vision day today, and it was exactly that, aligning the team, giving everybody, you know, the full, you know, story and picture behind where we are and what we're aiming to achieve. And interestingly, beyond this crisis, you know, the reason that, you know, we're talking about this one, the lockdown isn't going to be a lockdown forever. And if we look at everything that's going on in the countries that have already been through this challenge, or, you know, nearing the end of this challenge, it is around about 3 months, 90 days. So it's worth thinking about that. We're 3 weeks in, 4 weeks in. You know, get some time aside, get your team together on a call, get some clarity in terms of what the message needs to be. So number 12 is identifying the leadership results that you need. And this is then about how you're going to communicate with your team with regards to, you know, the results that you want to and are aspiring to achieve. Now, again, there's a reason why some of the areas here may sound as though they're obviously spread throughout this whole presentation today, and that's because they are critical. Communication to be effective needs to be appropriate, and you know, I suppose, you know, I've talked about DISC already, and now it's about how do we get that richness into it, and again, go back and have a look at some of the tools you're using today. The appropriateness of today is for you to hear my voice and to actually see the context of what we're talking about, for you to then go away and determine, all right, these are the areas that I need to focus on, these are the notes that I need to take, this is the way I need to actually, you know, bring it into play within my organization. You've got to work hard on all these because of the distance. You know, if you think about the richness of a one-to-one conversation, the shift in tone, I'm pretty certain that had I not had a slightly varying inflection in my voice this afternoon, many of you would have already gone. I don't know if any of you have seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off, but there's a great scene in there where the teacher stands up and he's doing the register and he just goes Bueller, Bueller, and he repeats it about 2 or 3 times, and it's enough to put you to sleep. You know, so if this isn't something that is your natural habitat, how are you going to actually create those skills, work on those skills, understand and how to unlock them? Because they're not natural for everybody, far from it. And then what about the scope? So, we're looking here at newsletters. We're looking at, recorded messages. If you look at WhatsApp, you can send recorded messages. If you look into, Office 365, you've got various different ways in which you're able to communicate on Office 365. There's a thing called Sway, which gives you the ability to make a very, very rich and engaging newsletter. There's other aspects on LinkedIn in which you're able to use to actually create that level of interaction. So what are the different ways in which you can actually create, richness and vast scope in terms of what you're doing? And that really does mean that you've got to start thinking out of the box. Now, interestingly on this one, by the way, this isn't meant to sound like it's all work for a leader to do. Part of this is not abdicating it, but actually delegating some of these aspects to the team is going to increase even greater engagement. And there's another great leadership tool. And then obviously just be, with all of this, what we don't want to be doing is having hollow conversations. Because obviously before this, we might not have communicated with our team in the same context. A lot of people are talking now, and I tend to agree with it, that at the end of this, virtual is going to be the new norm. So just think about the richness and scope of the communication that you're going to be sharing now, and the message that you're looking to get across to whom and how, and the impact that it has on them. There's no reason at all that once we've done that through this period, we don't maintain that on the other side and period going forward, because it's just going to become something that is the norm to the team, but remains a way of increasing that level of engagement. So number 13 is maximizing a tool's capability to minimize your effectiveness. So when we look at this, it's using all the tools that you've got at your disposal, and then making sure that you're choosing the right tools to use it accordingly. So it's making sure that you're able to be as effective a leader, and your leadership, so everyone that's in your ship is effective as leader or indeed a manager in relation to the tools that we have got to use. And in that way, the one thing that we can be really clear is that actually everything where and if you look at the list that we're offering there, in essence, that you can use them in a very, very productive, efficient way to create the leadership responses you're looking for. Go back to the very, very beginning when I said principles haven't changed. You still want the same outcomes. We've just got to lead in a different way. And this is one area where we've got to focus on what those tools look like. So number 14 is, it's called seeking feedback to best serve the outcomes, the others, and ourselves. So remember the 3 O's. What have you got currently that's giving you evidence? Now, so with everything we're talking about this afternoon and what you're going to take away from today in this afternoon, what I would suggest you do is actually go and have a look at that evidence. Look at the 3 O's model, the outcome, the others, and ourselves, and have a look to the evidence that you've got right now and think, okay, are there areas that I can actually start to, build impact here? Can I identify, the people that are, I know right now are going to be the ones that I can develop the trusted advisors with. It's the opportunity for you to use your people in that context. We were talking earlier that how do I leverage the message, not just through myself, but through others. I think a great one, this goes back to the question, and listening. It's the open-ended questions and just being open and honest on this. If you've got to find some information out there, then don't beat about the bush. Go out there and ask what needs to be asked. Do what you ought, not what you want. Be patient in terms of, actually how you start to build this whole environment. I've talked to quite a few of my clients that have got teams now, and there are challenges. Don't forget, as a leader, you're also coming and leading from an isolated point, but your team are isolated. There are issues that will present themselves from that, and it's having these conversations is going to be something that is going to help with the team, but it's going to take time, because you might need to have some conversations with some of the team that you've not had before, that actually that's irrelevant to my place of work. There could be a coach, just chatting to somebody just yesterday, and a very, very significant family issue. which they were embroiled in because they were there and they couldn't get away from it, and they had to have the conversation with the owner in order to actually allay them that actually the environment for me at the moment is kind of prickly and I have challenges. And you've got to have patience, but you've also got to be that person that is able to have the ability to reach out to them in that respect. And that points in terms of allowing that time to actually have those conversations, and also allowing the time for you to prepare the three O's, the outcomes, the others, and the ourselves, in terms of where we are 3 weeks into this. You're not going to go away today and immediately have a massive impact in terms of your leadership and the leadership of your team and your leaders leading in a better way. So again, goes back to putting this plan in place, that you've got time in order to actually put this into context in the best way possible, to structure your goals in order to actually deliver. Make one of the goals how we're going to empower our team to deliver at this level. Number 15 is again, this is really about you, and it is about how you overcome the negative self-talk. Just give me a show of hands that when this all started, the level of anxiety was quite high for most people. Was that the case with you? Did you feel quite a lot of anxiety with all of a sudden everything's changed in my world, in my business, with my team, because I'm now dislocated, we're now moving, and suddenly I think, I know a lot of people went from I think it was a Friday being in the office to a Friday evening being locked out. This stuff is scary. Let's not be under the illusion of that. So as a result of this, your own self-talk, your own beliefs are going to be ones that are going to, impact on your ability to lead through this. What is your level of battle toughness? Your resilience in terms of being able to deal with this. There's a thing called situational pressure. If your self-talk is negative, at the critical moment you need to step up and be the leader, it's going to have an impact and it's going to hold you back. So what do you need to do in order to actually make sure that you're looking towards positive self-talk? Now, this isn't mumbo jumbo. It's not, high five, happy slappy type stuff. This is generally, science in terms of how we function as human beings. So it's definitely worthwhile making sure that you're clear on that. And reach out for help if you need it. As a leader, accept you can't do it all. There is a balance between what you can do in your organization. Go back to, the fact that actually engaging your team, where you've got the systems in place in the business, if you've got to tweak a couple of systems, or processes in order to, maximize how they operate and how they're efficient now, then do that. Don't be the default setting. I think sometimes that's something I come across all too often, is that as a leader, we the burden resides with us. And I've worked with enough business owners now to know that they, in times of high impact, and I guess even now in terms of the crisis, is we're all putting our underpants outside of our trousers and being a superhero, or getting our Wonder Woman bracelets on and going out there and being a superhero. The point of reference here is you've got a team, lead them. Identify the areas where you can delegate to the team. And what greater opportunity to then start to engage your team in terms of actually how they can deliver and nurture. Go back to what I said about that leader. And if you want a book to read, it's a great book to read. David Marquette, Turn This Ship Around, and you'll get it. I think getting the balance right on this one is going to be a real key focus for you in terms of your own self preservation. And it's not about being selfish, by the way, but sometimes you've got to have the ability to say no. Sometimes you've got to have the ability, as we've just said, to actually delegate this to your team. Some of those aspects are going to be absolutely critical going forward. And I think sometimes is also, with the balance of just being accessible. We can sometimes in these situations almost see that there is favoritism, and I think we've got to make sure that we don't fall into that particular mix. Your time management. I'm a firm believer that time management is absolutely about one thing, and it is about self-management, and that's a choice. So go back to that negative self-talk. Go back to now. What are the habits that I can bring into to actually, be more efficient myself, to be productive, to actually be a great example for my team. And one of the things on this one, which is a good mix between the, your self-management and actually efficiencies and your mindset, is actually putting a timetable together, ordering what it is you need to do on a day-by-day basis, putting structure in place. Because once you've got structure in place, they're not going to suffer so much in terms of the impact of overwhelm. And again, just know yourself, know your values, know your priorities, know when you're really well in terms of what it is that's going to, where your energy levels are high. When's the best time of the day for you to get focused in that respect? Rule 18, and we're almost there now, is what do you want to be as an organization when you come out of this? Look at the development opportunities that you've got as an organization right now. There's an interesting one here, and a twofold to this one. I always talk to businesses in their direct response to, what do the behaviors that we need to see and experience within the organization look like? And the behaviors are kind of interesting, because when we start to look at the behaviors, they lead to the values. Most businesses try to start with the values. But actually, if we determine, and again, this is where that alignment comes in with your team. If you determine what the alignment looks like, or what the behaviors look like that you want people to bring to their working environment, you can then start to shape what the values are. And it's just a better way of doing it. It's a way that enrolls and inspires your team. I think finishing off today, the final rule is really just rule number one. And it's remembering that, actually leadership is leading. All we find ourselves in now is a different circumstances, a different set of challenges as a leader that might be quite alien to many of us. The high stress situation, the lack of human interaction, the fact that we've got to lead at a distance, the fact that as a leader I'm not just isolated in the business now, I'm now isolated, the fact that I've got my inner dialogue to have a conversation with. So just remember that leading is all about leading. What you've got to do is just adapt to the leading opportunities that you've got here. Now we've just done 64 minutes. I just want to share a couple of thoughts with you, and what I'd like you to do is to write down now the 5 actions that you need to take. What 5 things do you need to take right now? What direction might that be that you need to give your team? Do I need to plan what we're going to be looking at in the next 90 days? Should I bring the team together and align us on the 3 O's principle? Have a look and think what is the concept of this one? I challenge you and encourage you, and indeed, stress strongly that if you haven't put a plan together yet, it's not too late. Get yourself your 90-day plan in place on how you're going to actually get through this challenging time. Number one priority for you and your team, and as the leader of your team, is to actually survive. The second point here is to actually make sure that there's opportunity and structure in your organization to maybe thrive. There's nothing to say that that's not an output that you could get here. By way of helping, at the moment, I'm putting 2 hours of pro bono work into 5 businesses a week. So if you want to engage, if you want to have a conversation, I can quite happily arrange a call with you and take you through in detail some of what we've talked about today, and indeed help with putting a plan in place. I warn you, it's a coaching session, so I will take you to places that you might not have been, and I will challenge you slightly, but that's not to put you off, but rather to impress upon you that, if we're going to have a conversation, then it's a serious conversation of how I can help in those 2 hours to get you to where you need to get to in terms of getting your business through this challenging time. I think that's kind of like what I've got from today. If there's any comments, please pop them into the question box. Each of you got a question. I'm more than happy. My contact details, if you want them, are here. So you can just drop me an email at stevegaskell@actioncoach.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, on social media. If we're not already connected, you can drop me a message, and we will send you through a link. And if you're open and you'd like to put 2 hours into the diary, then you would be more than welcome. On that note, we are at 57 minutes, and it's been my absolute pleasure this afternoon to share this focus on what is essentially virtual leadership. And I truly hope that it has been of some use and benefit to all of you who've taken the time to join me on the call this afternoon. From me, I thank you again, and I look forward to our next engagement. Oh, incidentally, do keep an eye out. I've got a series of 60-minute webinars that I'm doing, from how our marketing needs to shift, to cash flow forecasting, to actually dealing with mindset and the fear context, and actually how businesses can pivot through this challenging time. So if you're interested in them, again, just drop us an email, stevegaskell@actioncoach.com. In the meantime, folks, we've still got a glorious day out there, where we are anyway, down here in Devon. I look forward to catching up with you all in due course. Thanks very, very much. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.